Not here.
Hey everyone, Wandering Bard here, and as promised in my previous video, today we're going to be taking a look at Final Fantasy XVI's Jill Warrick, dominant of Shiva, warden of Ice, and love interest to the protagonist Clive Rossfield, which I'll be honest and say I had mixed feelings about at first. Due to my whole USPS not delivering the game on time saga from way back when I first played the game, I did have a few things spoiled to me about Final Fantasy XVI, one of which was this romance. So when I actually saw it happening, I was both rooting for it as someone who's a sucker for romance, and was also kind of uncomfortable because, well, these two were essentially raised like they were siblings, even though they aren't actual siblings. Bit of family history here, Jill's father was chief of the northern tribes who went to war with Rosaria in an attempt to claim their mother crystal. After losing the latest of these wars, Duke Elwyn of Rosaria took her as a political hostage to prevent further aggression. So Jill was basically raised alongside Duke Elwyn's two sons, Clive and Joshua, and they grew to love her as though she were their sister. They knew fully well that she wasn't their blood sister, but it still feels kind of weird. I will note though that Jill does not seem to look at Duke Elwyn as an adoptive father. She never calls him father, and she acts much more deferentially around him than Clive and Joshua do. And she definitely doesn't look at Annabella as a mother figure. Which makes sense given how she treats both Jill and Clive. Even back then, Jill and Clive were pretty close, just, not in that way. So I think there was always an awareness throughout that, as close as they were, Jill wasn't really their sister, which definitely helps this relationship work in my opinion. So now that we have the potential ick factor out of the way, there's two things I really want to talk about with Jill. One, does this romance work as far as their compatibility as people goes? And two, does this romance come at the cost of Jill's agency? And I'm especially asking that because one of the critical complaints for this game was that the female characters were underdeveloped, which could honestly be said for quite a few characters in the game, because the story focused so heavily on Clive as a protagonist rather than on a party of heroes. In fact, my next character video for Final Fantasy XVI will be me talking about characters that didn't have enough material for a full-length analysis. But with love interest characters it can be tricky because so often with love interests they're written with no motivation besides supporting the man in their life. So I want to evaluate whether that was indeed the case for Jill or not. Let's dive right in.
This is it then. Time to prove yourself.
Wishing on a star?
I'm a little old for that.
So I wanted to include this scene partly because there is so much here that gets paid off down the line, but also because it's a fantastic depiction of how their relationship starts. She's 12 years old here, so she's a bit younger than Clive, and so she's still a child, and you'd expect her and Joshua to be the ones who get along together better. And they do get along quite well. They laugh together, they watch Clive spar, presumably they play together, but she and Clive also have here a very strong relationship, which is built on mutual empathy. And honestly, a big part of that is probably how Annabella, Clive's mother, treats both of them. She openly despises Clive because he was rejected by the Phoenix as its dominant, and she sees Jill as little more than a hostage, a savage, someone to be used for marriage maybe if she's suitable, and nothing more. So what I love about these two right off the gate is that they support each other through all of it. Clive tries to cheer her up when she's down, even if he gets in trouble for it, and Jill worries over him with the upcoming war even though she knows how strong he is. They care about each other, and it sets a good foundation for what they eventually become.
Talia told me what happened. He saved my life.
After nearly taking it, I had no idea. Forgive me, but how did you ever come to be there, Jill?
So, after the Night of Flames, when Duke Elwyn, Joshua, and many others lose their lives, the Iron Kingdom invades Rosaria and carts Jill, along with many other women, off as slaves. It was here that Jill awoke as the dominant of Shiva, which caused the Iron Kingdom to begin using her as a weapon. During this time, some of her countrywomen looked after her, but the Iron Kingdom used her feelings towards them to her advantage, forcing her to either serve or watch them be slaughtered. Jill describes that, as time went by, she became so mired down and detached that she no longer felt anything. She looked at herself and saw a monster, especially when she fought against the Dalmex and she saw hundreds die all around her. And as the apathy set in, she no longer saw any point in living if that's all that life was going to be. You have to remember that even prior to this, she spent most of her life alone and isolated from her real people in the north. The only people she had left that she really cared about were Clive, Joshua, and to a lesser extent Duke Elwyn, and to her knowledge all three of them were now dead. There was no reason for her to hope for release or to believe that any other nation would treat her any better than the Iron Kingdom. Clive and Sid ended up being her deliverance not only from an early grave, but from her own despair. I talked in the Clive video about how having Jill back in his life gave him something better to hope for than vengeance. Having Clive back in hers gave Jill a reason to live, period. And now that they're together again, they have an avenue to work through what happened to both of them. Which is good because they both have a lot of baggage they need to work through. Notably, what happened to Joshua. In a large part of why they start with Joshua, why they begin dealing with Clive's situation, well, part of it is that Clive's is more immediately able to be dealt with, but also because Joshua mattered to Jill too, and she wants to understand what happened to him. So they go through Rosaria together, eventually reaching Phoenix Gate, and Clive is the one unloading his pain, his despair, and Jill is playing the support role again. And if they had empathy for each other as kids, they even more so do now as adults because Jill can relate to his situation in a lot of ways. She cares about him, but the important thing is she's not in love with him. Not yet. They're not a romantic pair yet, and there's a good reason why that's the case.
I don't think I could do this without you. You never were one to hide from the truth, even when we were young. And you haven't changed a bit.
You're wrong. I have changed.
So, this is actually something really personal for me that I want to talk about. There was a time in my own life when I was under a lot of heartbreak and stress all at once. Nothing nearly as serious as what these two experienced, but it left its mark all the same, and my whole demeanor became harsher and sadder during that time. One day I was unloading about it to a friend, like how I felt like I had changed a lot, and her words to me were to think of it less like I'd completely changed, but more like there was a new shell or a new overlay around me right now. Like at your core you're still you, things are just hard right now. Going back now to the scene between Clive and Jill, I feel like this scene shows where Clive and Jill are disconnected a bit, in that they both have part of that answer, but not all of it. Clive is the one saying at your core you're still you, you're still the person I remember, and Jill is over here saying no, a lot has happened and I've changed, and I need you to see that. Right now they don't fully see each other, which is why I'm glad they don't start a romance right here. Like yes, they obviously still care for each other, but if they had leapt into each other's arms right now, their relationship would have been built on mutual empathy, which is good, and on past nostalgia, which is much less good. It can lead to something good down the line, but a healthy relationship of any kind requires the people involved to understand each other, and they aren't quite there yet. This is important though because it gives us a lens to properly view Jill's characterization here. When she goes back with Clive and they pledge themselves to Sid's cause, she's not doing it because she's in love with Clive. Yes, they promise to support each other, but a large part of it is that they also have shared goals. They both cared about Joshua and still want answers for why he died. They both have things in their past they want to atone for, and they both witnessed the massacre at Eastpool and don't want to see another. They, together, came to an answer for what they wanted to do moving forward, and they supported each other in choosing it.
So, atonement then, is it?
That was the answer we found.
The only one we need.
So the dynamic works really well in the beginning when Sid is in the lead and Clive and Jill are both in the support position for his mission. When things go wrong and Sid dies, he appoints Clive as his successor and asks him to keep their shared dream alive. So now Clive is the one making the calls, and the dynamic shifts to one where Jill is in a support role for him, which I think is part of why people begin to take issue with her writing, because it can bring the perception that her only goal now is to support Clive. A lot of cases where writing an ally or a love interest can work really well is when they come from a different background from the protagonist and or have their own goals or dreams separate from the main story. In Jill's case, she technically does have a different background from Clive. She was born in the northern tribes and still has memories from her time there. but she was raised along Clive for a lot of her life, so it doesn't feel like her background is much different. I do think one way they could have added another layer to Jill's character, separate from Clive, would have been to involve her people in some way. We never find out what happens to them after Jill was taken captive, or even after the war with Duke Elwyn, and so we're led to believe that they were killed by the encroaching blight. Bringing them into the story in some way would have done more for her character for sure. As it is, her goals and Clive's align for most of the story, which again I don't think is a bad thing, because I genuinely believe she chose those goals for her own reasons and not because she's in love with Clive. Obviously she does care about him and she wants to help him, and vice versa, but she chose this mission because she still believes in what they're trying to achieve, even when she questions whether the approach that they're taking is the correct one. The first time we as the player get a hint of any romance between them is after the whole Iron Kingdom arc, which is another thing that I absolutely must discuss.
I don't want to be a monster, Clive. Do you understand? I want to choose a different path, a better path. To live on my own terms. But before I can do that, I need to come to terms with my past.
So this part of the story begins as just a practical part of Clive and Jill's mission. They need to go to the Iron Kingdom to destroy the Drake's Breath Mother Crystal. But for Jill, this is her going back to the place where she was imprisoned for 13 years. So this scene is a bit of a role reversal for Jill and Clive compared to what happened at Phoenix Gate. Now it's Jill's needs and Jill's past that are being addressed, and it's Clive's turn to play the support role, which he's happy to do. Jill takes the lead once they reach Ironholm, and it's her knowledge and her power that prove instrumental in both reaching the Mother Crystal and destroying it. She also fulfills a promise she made long ago by killing Imran, the high priest who abused her and used her as a weapon against the Dalmex. So I love this part of the story for that reason, in that it fills out Jill more as a character, but I also love it because it's not until after all this happens that we get a hint of romance between her and Clive. And that's so important because unlike the scene at Phoenix Gate, they have a real relationship now. Not only have they been fighting side by side for 5 years, but they're also able to be vulnerable to each other. They've each shown each other their fears, their hardships, their regrets, and they supported each other in coming to terms with their pasts. In other words, they properly see each other now, and that's when they're ready to act on their feelings for each other. They do get interrupted, curse you Gav, but we get a resolution on this later.
This is the second time Barnabas has bested me. I'm powerless against him.
And maybe there really is nothing else for it but to give yourself to his master. Only you won't do that. The Clive I know would never do that.
So a lot happens between the Iron Kingdom arc and this scene. Notably that Clive loses twice in battle against King Barnabas, the dominant of Odin. The first time was back in the Free Cities, where Clive lost horrifically one-on-one, and Jill got captured covering his retreat. Clive, Joshua, oh yeah, he's still alive by the way, and the others chase him down to rescue her, which leads to honestly one of my favorite scenes in the entire game, only for Clive and Joshua to lose again. They were able to escape, mostly thanks to Jill, but she and Clive were left stranded on Ash, and Clive was left with a mountain of self-doubt after both losing in battle and with the revelation of what Ultima intends for him. Jill, seeing his pain, willingly gives him the power of Shiva, offering him the strength that he needs to fight. There's a lot to talk about here. A lot of people were upset that Jill, after being such an integral part of the story, wasn't involved in the very final battles against Ultima, which mainly happened because she gave up her icon in this scene. Dion Lesage was involved in the finale, despite having also lost his icon, which did bring up accusations of sexism from some players when only male characters went to the battle. I will point out, however, that bringing either Dion or Jill was a huge risk. While they could still transform into their icons, there was no guarantee they could control them, as we saw with both Benedicta and Hugo. They only took a chance on Dion because it was the only way they could reach Origin without using up too much of Joshua's remaining strength. But apart from that, only Clive and Joshua, dominants who could reliably control their icons, went to fight Ultima. I think there is a valid complaint to be made that Jill doesn't get to make much of an impact in general where combat is concerned. She performs amazing feats of magic outside of combat, including freezing a path through crashing water and being able to temporarily hold back lava, but she doesn't perform well in battle, as we see her lose against Odin, Titan, and the Liquid Flame, though I will point out for the latter case that she was fighting a lava monster with ice magic inside a volcano. So I think that was mainly her being counterpicked. I do wish we could have seen her shine more in battle, especially if we could have gotten a playable boss fight as Shiva, but I do understand why she wasn't involved in the final battle. With the way the story and the game's customization system were going, we all knew Clive was going to gain Shiva's power at some point. So I am glad they made that happen in a way that didn't involve Clive fighting her, and fit both the story and Jill's character. Because this scene is the payoff from when Jill and Clive were children, when she went to see him before the imminent war with the Iron Kingdom. If Clive is going to insist on looking after everyone else and bearing their burdens, then Jill is going to look after Clive, which is both beautiful and can be extremely unhealthy if there's no accountability. Because Clive does take on too much, he doesn't look after himself, and he keeps pushing away help and trying to do everything himself. And as Joshua points out, the main reason Jill gives Clive her power here is because she knows Clive is going to keep trying to do everything himself, so he may as well have the power to do it. It would have been better if she had been firmer with him, held him accountable more, but I think in this scene she is trying to do exactly that. She's reaching out to him here, begging him that if he's going to insist on fighting alone, then he needs to save himself too. I think that for her, this was a way she could support him in his fight and give him the power he needs to do just that, to save himself. And Joshua is eventually able to build on that foundation to get through to Clive when nobody else could. So I personally do love this scene, and I also love how this moment acts as a payoff for so many others throughout the game. Once again, they're able to be completely vulnerable with each other and support each other. The relationship feels earned now, and after they realize their feelings for each other, there's a noticeable difference in how comfortable they are together, which I also really appreciate. Had Clive survived his final battle against Ultima, I think these two would have had a long and happy life together as one of Final Fantasy's best and healthiest couples. Sadly, life had other plans, but I do love their relationship. I love Jill as a character, and if we ever got a sequel to Final Fantasy XVI, I think she could be a good protagonist in her own right. I would be interested to see how her story ended down the line, but for now, this is all I have for this video. Let me know if you agree with my take on her. I'm willing to bet that I got some things wrong or that people had a different interpretation of her than I did. I do appreciate feedback. All I ask is that we try to be nice to each other in the comments section. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe for more character content, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.